our mission is making you successful with your ARCHIBUS and Autodesk applications. We are your technology partner, so in any question, regardless of this presentation, any question on this product and your systems, your platform systems, please feel free to call us. And here are a few reminders. Version 22 preview guide is on Robotech.com website. You will find it. It's on the first page on the news section. You can download it or review it. It's pretty comprehensive. It will have all the features there with the screen caps. So everything that you hear today, you will be able to also review from this preview guide. In addition to that, the live version 22 test drive is on our site. That's going to be used as a sandbox for you to go and play with the new version. All you need is to click on it, put a password that is on that page. Again, it will be easy to find. Just go to the Web Central portion of part of the page and start it. So this is a live demo with the data sets, and there is also a help link, which is kind of a tutorial for version 22. To remind everybody, our tech support questions that are sent to support@robotechcad.com will get to more people than just the person that you sent to. You can still continue to send questions to our technicians individually, but if you CC support@robotechcad.com, you will get also a receipt and a case number that you can follow up, and it will help us also follow the cases until closing. I wanted to remind also that Robotech has hosting and cloud services for Autodesk and ARCHIBUS systems, and we will be happy to discuss it with you. It's also on our site, but please give us a call if you are interested in hosting. The advantage, of course, is eliminating your IT hassle and cost, actually. And the result is pretty nice. You can just remotely use these products from our site. And it's backed up and everything is working for you in the background. Another thing that I wanted to remind everybody, many of you know that we are having an on-demand production services available to you. So if you need any help in production, either on-site or in remote, either part-time or full-time or whatever, we will work with you to help you with that production. So thank you very much again for participating. For any questions, call us or email us to text@robotechcad.com. Enjoy the webinar. Now, what's new in ARCHIBUS version 22 by Greg Alevers, VP of Sales in ARCHIBUS Boston. Here it is to you, Greg. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Shlomo. Glad to have everybody here to see what's new in ARCHIBUS. So we're going to just switch gears here and make me the presenter. And with that, okay, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to spend some time just highlighting some of the new capabilities within the software and talk about some of the new applications that we have developed for you and the continuing progress of ARCHIBUS. Make sure that you can see all the new capabilities. For this release, we have spent quite a bit of time focusing on asset management. So we've really expanded the capabilities. And as you can see from the homepage here that we've created. It's very nice that you can organize information about your assets, and we've included a whole new series of metrics, and you can also see the ability to embed maps within your home pages. But the nice thing is you can concentrate all of your activities in a single home page. We have made it so that you can manage any type of asset, including your properties, buildings, equipment, and furniture, and make sure that you do it either at the web browser level or at the mobile framework level. And we've included a new application to help facilitate the collection of asset data as it's being received by the organization. In the system, we have given and created a number of consoles that help you manage these various processes. And so the goal here is to make sure that you have the ability to manage the full life cycle of acquisition, of the use and changes to the product, as well as managing the disposition of and disposal of those assets as they leave your inventory. I've heard many examples in talking with users over the past couple of months as we've released the product, and heard some interesting tales about how people are struggling with knowing truly what's in their portfolio. We've also taken a look at how to better consolidate the planning process and bring in some of the plans to acquire new assets as part of your portfolio. So as you're planning strategic direction within the organization and proposals to expansions and big retrofits, included within that will be the ability to add more details around some of the requirements for assets in the portfolio. One of the items that I'm most excited about, of course, is the strategic space planning application that has been added to the system. And what's nice is that it fully engages you to create a number of scenarios about your portfolio and leverage that information based on what you currently have and use it to develop plans going forward, and of course naturally to generate stack diagrams. We'll get deeper into this, but also to understand the current capacity of your facilities and measure that against the current allocation and future plans so that you can see when you're going to be running out of capacity and availability and know when to lease more space or add new capacity through construction and acquisition. We've also incorporated an expanded use of the red line capabilities within the software to help facilitate some of the more detailed planning exercises around your facilities so that you can convert your stack diagram into a combination of block plans and or allocation plans as to what you expect to do for the future. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what it means to go to version 22.1 and how that will impact those of you that already have things like space inventory and performance, personnel and occupancy, maintenance and operations, and a few of the other applications. To get in line with is talk a little bit about the space planning capabilities of the software and things that you can do to better coordinate move activities. And one of the things would be to actually generate move projects right from the space console. And so in a second here I'm going to demonstrate how easy it is to now create a move project right from the space console as you do your initial planning. And so the way to do that is we'll just drop in here and actually see what happens. We have begun a planning exercise where we have already located some people on the floor plan, and we're in the process of using the drag and drop features to place some employees onto the floor plan based on a move that we're currently facilitating. And we're looking at where we have available capacity and or vacant space. Once we've completed assigning people their locations, the next step that we do, of course, is to view those assignments. And as you can see, we have 5 employees. Typically, we would commit those assignments, but what I'm going to do is actually create a new move order. So this is something I'm planning to do at some point in the future. From this, I'm actually connecting to the move management capabilities of ARCHIBUS, and what I'm going to do is generate a new move project. And so if we were in move management, we would actually be doing this, but we can do it right from the space console. And in this case, what I want to do is coordinate the move around the BOSSMED building and assign one of the appropriate people to be the point of contact for the move. And then naturally designate when that move will occur at some point in the future, within a 3, 4, 5, 6 couple month window, whatever makes sense for how you plan and coordinate moves. And so now that I've actually created the move project, ARCHIBUS is actually creating all of the necessary move orders and looking at the move project. And as I use my page navigation, I'm going to go over to the Enterprise Move Management application. And quickly what I want to do is just check to see that that was created. From here you can see that I've created an ARCHIBUS move. Its status is correct, requested, and I have the 5 people that I assigned coming from no location into the locations I've designated. And what's good about this is now I can use the move management project to do all the move planning scenarios, add additional people, and make changes accordingly before I complete the execution. So I just wanted to share with you, this is a new feature. It's available in 22.1, and it's something that I found very exciting. Now, every year we go to conference and we talk to a lot of people, and one of the concerns, of course, is how do I print the plans from the browser environment? Because some people rely very heavily on paper output. So in working with our development team and listening to the users, we've come up with what I believe to be a very exciting new set of capabilities that will enable you to provide better control and output to a PDF format that you can then print information. And so there's a number of settings that are very, very powerful, but the most important is the use of asset text. In the current situation where you are in 21.3 or earlier, when you print to PDF, what ends up happening is it uses the dynamic placement of text. In 22.1, you can now coordinate the placement of asset text based on the asset text in your actual AutoCAD drawing files, which gives you a higher degree of control of any of those odd-shaped rooms where you place the text in a location of your desire. You can also control the heights and dimensions of the text to make it easier to read, since oftentimes I'm sure you've outputted and determined that there was overlapping text. So let's go through that process here in a moment. What I'm going to do is activate the new command called Generate Ad Hoc PDF Report. And as you can see, we have ability to determine a number of different parameters. And one of the things that we're going to do is change the text type. We've already assembled the fact that we want to focus on a specific set of buildings. So we filtered just for the BOSSMED building and the 3 associated floor plans. We've now generated a PDF file. The big distinction here is any of the asset text in the drawing is now positioned based on the asset text from the actual AutoCAD floor plans, and the size of the text is much better controlled than previously, so that we don't have clashes of too much of the text. And you can see how easy it is to read, and it generates a PDF file for you to work with. Moving on to other improvements, let's focus in on the building ops console for those that use on-demand work. And one of the key areas that people have expressed, of course, is the performance. And what are things that we can do to better enable people to jump in and view the information? There's some new parameters that we've added in the settings. I find them very exciting and have played with them a little bit myself. One, of course, is to collapse the bands of the different types of work coming into the screen so that you're not loading all the data at the same time. And another parameter that you'll see in a moment is controlling the number of records that are displayed in the band and calling that progressively until you get to the full amount. This makes life a little bit easier and, again, speeding the performance of the consoles. So with that, let me kind of jump in and show you what I mean by that. We are in the home page for facilities. We jump into the building operations console. And what you'll see as it comes up on the screen, of course, is the banding, but we also see that we're displaying 20 records at a time within the system. And as we jump through, we can load more data, as you see me do here, so that I can scroll progressively through all of the records that I need to view. And of course, we can apply the usual filters through the console to make it a lot easier to view this information. So this is one great setting that I think will excite a lot of people who have a lot of data in their consoles. I have been myself surprised by talking to a number of users where they are keeping several thousand records open for a number of reasons. Even though they may be complete, they're still in the active list of work orders, and that naturally creates more time to load all of that data. So I find this very exciting. I think another thing that people have talked to us about is the notion of our service level agreements that we use to route work through the system. One of the challenges that people have is that oftentimes work is misassigned and usually ends up in canceling the work order that was created and generating a new one, which creates a little bit of confusion, or rejecting a work for the lack of information, and again, having to start over again. What's nice about this new capability that I'm going to share with you is the fact that you can change status of work and kind of start over again, giving you much more flexibility in the way you set up your service level agreements. So let's go through that process, and what we'll do is we'll start in the role of supervisor, and we'll make the assignment of work to go ahead and schedule this work to an individual. In assigning the work, what we'll do is make sure that we designate the appropriate craftsperson. And again, here we are simply saving those changes for us to work on. And once we've done that, we'll go ahead and issue the work. And so now this becomes in the queue of the craftspersons or technicians. They can come in and print it. They can look at it on the screen. Or assuming them using mobile framework, they can call it up on their system. So we'll now change role to that of the craftsperson. They will check in to see what work they have assigned to them. And since it's the beginning of the day, what we'll do is look at and sync up with the amount of work. And you can see number 884 is the work request I generated. In so doing that exercise, the technician goes out and does the work, and as they investigate further, they realize that somebody misassigned the work. And so one of the changes you'll see is we can actually adjust the problem type on the fly, and the craftspersons recognize that instead of being an electrical light bulb, it's mechanical. And as such, this changes what happens with the work request, because no longer is it assigned to that craftsperson. When they sync back up with the server, it's pulled from their queue because they're no longer responsible for this work. They may have spent some time on it, and they would record that time before they release it, but it's up to the supervisor to do so. So if we go back to 884, we can see the problem type has been adjusted. And if we look at the history of the work, and we can view that by just clicking on the work request, we can see that it was requested, approved, and assigned and issued, but during the issue process, it was changed from electrical to mechanical, which puts it back in requested and approved and assigned so that the supervisor can proceed to do so. All of the history was captured, as I mentioned, and the work request stays the same. It just changed its status in the process. So if you look at the new service level agreement capabilities, you'll see quite a few improvements there that you'll be able to take advantage of. What are some other things that we're doing? We're continuously evolving the use of the Smart Plan extension for Revit as more and more of our users are growing interested in what it can do. And we're making sure that we have that connectivity between the Revit models and the ARCHIBUS database. And included in that is, of course, linking to all of the different models that are actually created. So in addition to the architectural model that many people work with, we can now link to the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing models as well and pull in that data for information. And sorry, I don't have a demonstration for you, but if you contact, Robotech, we can certainly arrange to view that. Looking at a couple of other areas that were enhancements across the product applications, one of the areas of interest for a lot of folks, of course, is the use of tracking all of the different parcels that are associated with their properties and managing some of the taxes. So we have set it up a mechanism by which you can identify all of the parcels and then actually schedule payment for taxes within the system. And so it's a new feature that I think a lot of people who do real estate portfolio will be happy to see joined in the system. Another great capability is the use of the geospatial capabilities that involve both Esri and now Google Maps, and I want to stress that involves both Esri and Google. There's a number of things that you can do, include mapping locations of your assets, properties, buildings, assets, people, etc. And as you can see, as you're zoomed out, what it does is it clusters a number of items, and the goal would be as you zoom in, you can start digging into deeper details and unclustering some of those markers. At the same time, the markers have added some new capabilities, not only to provide a range of colors to denote certain capabilities, but also size to denote a certain level of scale associated with the properties in question. And then finally, we continue to improve upon the ability to take your campus-style map and actually place the footprints of those buildings on the map and then use that to drill down into and see the variety of floor plans that you have, so you can see how space is being allocated or classified across your campus for a variety of uses and help do some of the planning that you need going forward. Finally, for the nerds in all of us, and I can't say that I'm nerdy, but I do have to, start and stop my local system. We have taken the capability of doing all of the systems administration roles for starting and stopping the various servers outside of the smart client and place them up in their own setup console so that people will be able to, restart their servers for any number of reasons as they apply changes to their databases. And so these are just a couple of the settings that you'll see in the console, and for those that have to do that a lot, you'll notice that that has been split from the actual smart client itself. Moving on to some of the fun new stuff, and one of my favorites, of course, is strategically planning space. Let's take a look at what that means for us. And so the goal here is to enable anybody to go in to ARCHIBUS and leverage the data that exists within that to develop plans, whether it's across the entire portfolio of buildings that you have, or whether it is included in a number of buildings that you want to plan specifically for the portfolio. And it can be within a given city, given state, region, or across an entire country, depending on the kind of plans that you want to develop. So naturally, we want to start with a very simple thing of developing a space forecast, and we want to use the current inventory to help us define what that means. Where do we get that forecast information from comes exactly from ARCHIBUS, and at the level of detail we determine we want to take a look at it. So it can be up to the business unit, down to the department in terms of looking at the information. As we allocate information, we can do it generically in the portfolio. We can look at it at a building level, regardless of how many floors you have. Or my favorite, of course, is the stack diagram with the buildings and floors fully intact. And then as we do this, the other area that we'd like to take a look at, of course, is where are we grabbing the data? Are we looking at the pure area information that we're pulling from the portfolio? Or are we just counting the number of space standards that we have within the portfolio? Or are we basing it on some sort of head count projection? And a lot of it, is determined by how you want to do these things. And the final step is to say which of the buildings in your portfolio you have. Are you doing this for a single building, a couple of buildings, all of the buildings in a given location, or again, all of the buildings in the portfolio? It's up to you to select the level of detail that you work with. This ultimately leads to a forecast where you pull in the information from the system, and it tells you what you have at the levels that you've described, and then you start ascribing details to the different periods. So we see period 1, period 2, period 3, period 4, and so on and so forth. Periods don't have to be linear in nature. They can be the next 3 months, the next 18 months, the next 5 years. Each period can be described however you want it within the system. Ultimately, what this leads to, of course, is a planning scenario. And in the planning scenario, the goal is to set up a sequence of events as to what's supposed to happen in different timelines. So we're not just looking at the near term for the next few weeks or the next few months, but we're looking longer term in terms of the next few months to the next few years in our planning scenarios. And what we're trying to do is determine what steps we take and what needs to occur on different times and places within the portfolio, so we can actually plan a sequence of events to add the capabilities to relocate groups from one place to another. So let's actually jump in and take a look at this process. I have set up a scenario for demonstration purposes where I'm in the city of Boston and I'm planning to add some new capacity to the portfolio. So let's go ahead and get started here. And the goal would be to pick that scenario that we're working on and actually pull in data from the forecast as well as all of the current capacity and availability within the portfolio. So what we see, of course, is the linkage to what locations we're looking at. We are highlighting the current allocations of all of the different buildings in our portfolio. As you can see here, we have clearly identified the stack diagrams of buildings that are currently in the portfolio or buildings that were to be added. As we look through the timeline, what we do is we start projecting changes to the portfolio. We can start adding new space directly into the portfolio, or we can pull it in from a forecast based on some growth pattern that we have. And so what we're doing is looking at different times and places during that. All along the way, as we look at these different forecast changes, as these different, capabilities of growth, we are looking to see how this matches up to the capacity. And what you see in this chart is not only the capacity, but when we either add new capabilities or capacity and when we remove capacity. This could be the addition of a new building that was purchased, the addition of a new building that was constructed, as this example shows, and also downstream, we look at when maybe a lease expires or some leases expire. And we're also mapping it to the allocation of space. Where does it fit in terms of how much of the space have we allocated, and do we have sufficient amount of space to plan what goes on? Let's return back to the staff plan here, and we can see how we've allocated space, and we're looking at the year in 2017. Let's start looking at some planning. So we're going to actually generate a markup here. And in the markup, what we're going to do is actually do some simple blocking plans. And the goal here is to use some of the new redline capabilities to help denote what's going on. In a case where we don't exactly know the floor plan, we could certainly turn off any of the highlights and assignments of space to departments and do a much more generic, placement of space on the portfolio. So what we're going to do is literally drag and drop some areas and place them to denote the blocking plan that we have. And so we proceed to highlight those areas in question and allocate the space as best we can for the process. And we do that for as many of the places that we have, being sure to identify which of the departments that we're looking at. And then I'll just go ahead and speed through this a little bit, just so that we can get to the finished, or at least a quasi-finished example. The goal here, of course, is to allocate a number of different areas. And as you can see, your demonstration jock, me, oftentimes doesn't always push the right button, but in this case, we're just grabbing a different area to represent another part of the allocation stat plan that we talked about and make sure that we assign the space, as I've done here. And we'll add one more in the sequence here, just to fulfill at least some of the front planning. And you'll notice that I can allocate as many different areas as I want and choose what parts of the floor plan I want to work with. And the whole goal here is to help the people doing that initial stack diagram and taking it to the next level to say how they want to allocate space on the floor. So in essence, what they're doing is saving that change and making it a part of the planning process. So we'll go ahead and, again, move on to the next set of steps here. So we've saved this, made that a part of our planning exercise. Not only have we done the stacking, but we've now actually incorporated the ability to do some of the blocking and assignment of space to help the planners determine the next steps once the plan's been approved. And as you can see, as we move through the various stages, what ends up happening, and if you'll notice on top, we have actually taken away the BossMed building because we are no longer leasing that space, and that's tied directly to the lease tables because the leases have expired. In the meantime, I have done everything I can to take the plan space of requirements from down below, which is called unallocated, and from the BossMed building, I have dragged and dropped all the space necessary to make sure that I move it to the different buildings to consolidate space. And if you look down below here in the Andrews building, one of the things I did was created new space that did not previously exist because we know, we didn't have that kind of organization. It could be based on the acquisition of a new team. It could be based on the acquisition or the creation of a new capability, and what we've done is added that as part of our planning process. So at the end of the day, what we can do, of course, is plan any number of portfolio changes based on constructing new buildings or based on leases starting and expiring or based on buildings purchased or sold. The scenarios can be done to include things like forecasted growth or to create new business lines added to the organizational requirements. And from that, we can generate those blocking plans that we need to move from the strategic down to the tactical when the time is right. So let's move on and let's talk a little bit about some of the asset management capabilities of the software. And so now we're taking a much deeper focus within ARCHIBUS to manage your assets, whether they be the fixed assets of the building or whether they be furniture or IT equipment or anything else, laboratory research, production, etc. And the goal is to make sure that we fully follow the process from the moment you first think of designing a facility to the last stages when you dispose of an asset. And so we take a look by developing the what-if scenario, but also focus on what it takes to acquire those assets and receive them and catalog them as part of the new buildings or existing renovations or addition of new capabilities, but also look at what happens. For those that are doing asset management, naturally you would look at all the maintenance history of the asset, but we also want to follow any of the other changes. Anytime it was it was taken out of service for repairs, anytime it was moved from one location to another, to finally knowing when that asset's disposed. I had the opportunity to come down to New York last week and visit with the user group. And one of the interesting discussions was one of the users mentioned in that conversation that they were evaluating the asset inventory of a certain location and checking the number of emergency generators they had. Their asset inventory said they had 6 emergency generators. Their physical check of the inventory showed they only had 2, which shows you oftentimes that there are assets that have been replaced over time, but yet have not been disposed of properly in the process. And that's the goal of ARCHIBUS, is to clearly manage that. Many of you have the asset portal, which is a direct, update and edit of the inventory. This is being upgraded to either the asset management or enterprise asset management capabilities. The asset management helps manage the life cycle of all of the different assets, and the enterprise asset management takes it a step further in terms of planning any new future projects, but also doing a job of synchronizing with existing systems like SAP, Oracle, or even your maintenance systems like Maximo. So part of that, of course, is to receive assets, whether you're taking on a new asset one at a time or you're adding multiple assets. And when you're adding multiple assets and you need to barcode them, you simply use your asset tag systems to catalog those assets. record the actual records, and then apply the barcode to these assets as they're received, so that ultimately you generate the new asset records, and then you apply the asset tag, which is the barcode, to each of the individual assets and align it accordingly within your system. This also can be done either through the Web Central, or it can be done as part of the new application called Asset and Equipment Registration, which again is a very simple process that enables you to either scan your assets, add them, or add new assets, and you'll see the exact same process that I used before. So let's say you're acquiring a new slate of equipment or test equipment or new production equipment. You identify whatever the last asset record is, count the number of new records you're going to be adding to inventory, determining what type of asset it is, if it's appropriate, and then simply moving forward and actually generating the new asset records. Of course, all of these will be assigned to a specific building on a certain site, and this will end up generating all of the records that you saw a moment ago. Now, the big part of this comes with the actual use and disposition of the asset as it goes through change, and this comes from the process of the Asset Lifecycle console. And let's take a look at what that means, and I'll probably skip through a couple of quick pieces. But what's nice is this Asset console allows you to pinpoint those assets that we discussed in terms of buildings, properties, equipment. It summarizes all of that. If we focus on one of our existing buildings or properties, it quickly narrows down all of the details and tells us all of the assets that are located there. We can certainly add any new buildings, equipment, or assets to the system, and we can also control and display what fields we need to display in the Asset Registry console. So we start with the notion of what we have, which is a very important aspect. If need be, we can certainly identify where those assets are situated. So if I need to look at where assets are on a plan, it's very easy to do by connecting directly to ARCHIBUS. And as you can see, this ties very closely to the capabilities in the asset portal. At any point in time, I can drill down into a specific asset, regardless of whether it's a building or a piece of equipment or a piece of furniture. The fun becomes when we start focusing in on what happens to those assets during the course of their life, and what are the different pieces of information you can collect and gather from ARCHIBUS, and you can look at it from its location, from its organization, or from its project details. And as we look at it, we can see what types of activities are associated with any given asset. And to help us identify that, let's go look at our equipment list and apply the appropriate filter. And maybe we want to find a specific asset within the portfolio. Once I do that, I can now see any and all activities that are associated with the asset. These could be work orders, these could be condition assessment records, these could be move records that are all being pulled out of ARCHIBUS. And in addition, we can see any historical change that has occurred. When was that record relocated from one position to another? And as I work through the portfolio, I can also look for different status of assets in terms of asset optimization and defining what are the things that I need to do to protect the critical assets that exist within, my portfolio, pinpoint their locations, as you can see here, and again, it could be what's active, inactive, buildings, properties, assets, as we said. And now that I have, taken a quick look at, what's going on, I can start focusing on those assets that might be good candidates for disposition within the portfolio. So we'll talk about that in a second here, because we have a whole console dedicated to the disposition of assets. So the asset disposal console is naturally very well named, because it now starts to look at what are the steps that I need to do to evaluate my assets and determine what should happen to them. Should I keep them? Should I refurbish them? Or should I proceed to move forward? And so let's take a look at the asset console here. And the Asset Disposition Console is here to help us look at those assets that are now determined to be not viable, possibly. And it could be things where they're currently listed out of service. And as a result, rather than just holding them on inventory, we actually want to move them forward to get them ready for disposition. We can certainly check all of the data in terms of what we know about them, so we have full access to edit any of the relevant information. But what I really want to do is mark an action. And so right now I am determining that that asset has to be evaluated to determine should it be disposed of, or is it missing? If I look for any assets that are not currently in inventory, one of the things I want to do is specifically identify key assets. I can select any and all of those assets, and again mark them for evaluation, or even mark them for disposal. So if I can't find those assets and I don't want to hold them in inventory, then I can set and mark those for disposal. And now that those have been marked for disposal, I can look at each or all of those assets and determine the next steps necessary. So again, following through on my process, I want to look at all of the assets that have been marked for disposal, and I want to actually take a step and say, okay, what are the things that I need to do? Well, let's say that boiler or emergency generator, as we saw before, was out. We can see all of the current status of any records from an assessment point of view that might be relevant to it, or any repair tickets or anything like that. And the goal here is to actually run through the process to send them off for disposition. So again, looking at the assets, whether they're missing or out of service. We actually want to take the steps to get these assets cleared of inventory. And again, here I'm selecting a few of those records, and now we're going to update their disposition. So the action in case will be mark for disposal or mark for donation. So we can donate, we can relocate to another business unit, we can refurbish, or we can, of course, send them off. This was a great conversation that we had with a prospective client this past summer, where they had a global asset management team. And one of the interesting aspects of the discussion is even though the company was planning major upgrades and renovations to their existing production lines, they had a separate team responsible for disposing of those assets. They were not made aware of what was going on, and they were given a short amount of time where they could not properly evaluate or value engineer what was the best steps to take with regard to disposition of assets. And here you can start seeing how you can better consolidate and integrate the processes within the organization. Another thing to keep in mind, of course, is that what happens if I'm going to be planning a whole new building. Maybe I'm growing a new science research center, or maybe I'm getting a new data center. And so what we want to do is include any of the ability to add assets to our system. And so the goal here is to look at the projects that we have in play. This pulls from those scenario plans that you saw me do before. We can include any sort of analytics that we want about those sites and locations to determine what the viability is, and run comparisons from one site to the next to determine which makes the most sense for any of the projects that we're looking at within the portfolio. And I'll go ahead and speed this up just a little bit. As we focus on any of these specific projects, what I want to do is naturally look at the detailed locations of where my projects are. And as I identify, where they're located, I can map the location of those assets as well as pinpoint what part of the floor plans that I need to correctly evaluate. So I can even focus in on one of the key floor plans and set that up to view and make this part of the planning exercise so that I know what my plan going forward is in terms of positioning organizations and associated tasks. Naturally linking any sort of markup, similar to what I did in the strategic planning capabilities, so that I can position maybe the placement of new assets within the portfolio, or maybe assign what organizations are going to be there. So this ties back to the portfolio planning process. But at the same time, I can also generate this output in such a way that what I want to do is share the information about the project for people and actually pull that information from ARCHIBUS and reflect it in a PowerPoint so that I can see some of the details that I'm trying to process. So we pull in those space requirements using the forecasting that you saw before. We pull in the asset requirements, identifying what we need for assets in the portfolio. Maybe we're going to be buying some new test equipment or some new medical equipment or maybe some new production equipment, and we want to make sure that that's included in the plan because it requires a lot of detail in terms of, what items we will need to properly assess all the tasks, all of the investments that we have to make to pull together a proposed plan moving forward. Naturally, we can use this as planning exercise to show, what the timeline is for a given project. So we can see what is supposed to happen and the timeline that they're supposed to occur. So again, we're tying in our project management capabilities. And then finally, once we're, done looking at the various projects, we can start comparing various scenarios to see what makes the most sense in terms of analyzing the portfolio that we have within the system. So again, these are some capabilities that are going to be very useful in terms of linking multiple aspects of ARCHIBUS to help you do the planning necessary for future changes to the organization. This is a very nerdy screen, but it's important to understand that a lot of the data that ARCHIBUS works with does not come from within ARCHIBUS alone. It comes from other systems, whether it be the SAP via procurement or asset inventory finance or Oracle or Maximo. And so we have created a number of off-the-shelf connectors that provide us the ability to keep those asset inventories synchronized. And again, the reason I show this is because we want to have a full understanding of what's within the system. One last aspect to keep in mind is the ability to link documents. As we know, ARCHIBUS does a lot of work to collect documents within the asset inventory and link them directly to those records, and oftentimes they're stored directly in the database. Now we're giving a little bit more flexibility in the sense that not only can we link them in the database, but we've made it much easier to link them to other sources on the network through various file servers or pathways in the network so that we can point to the appropriate documents either inside the database or from the database to where the information can be found on the internal network. So remembering when you look at asset management from an ARCHIBUS point of view, it is meant to help manage that full lifecycle process. And when you look at enterprise asset management, it is also used to further enhance the ability to do any of the planning of future projects as well as reconcile inventory with other aspects of the system. And you can choose either asset management or enterprise asset management depending on what capabilities you're most interested in. The last thing I want to speak to, of course, is the environmental programs that we have. We have a number of applications that we work with. They range in size from compliance, hazardous materials, energy management, and emergency prep. These are areas that we focus on for this particular release. Compliance management is help, keep track of any of the regulations or safety programs that we want to have in place and make sure that we manage correctly. Hazardous materials is actually the MSDS application that we've had for a number of years, and we have rebranded it and given it broader capabilities. We have also made sure that our emergency preparedness applications talk more directly to a lot of the different aspects of ARCHIBUS, especially in the environmental. And our energy management program and application continue to evolve to give us greater, capability to truly assess what's going on within our program. Starting with compliance management, the areas that we want to focus on, of course, are managing all of the data and how easy it is to now assign the same data to multiple records by selecting those records and then picking the parameters that are needed to make the assignment. More importantly, oftentimes in order to, comply with these activities, we have to either generate service tickets or preventive maintenance tasks, and ARCHIBUS has done a much better job in terms of coordinating the relationship for those that have on-demand work and preventive maintenance back into compliance management. This ensures that all of the items that need to be done are not only scheduled as a task, but can be coordinated directly with items like service desk and maintenance and operations to complete them going forward. In sequence, the next thing we want to do is take our hazardous materials app, which was previously named MSDS, and go through an extensive ability to inventory those assets. We've also, of course, created a mobile app to help support some of that endeavor, and the goal, of course, is to sync with the various locations in our portfolio and being able to pinpoint on those floor plans where we have different types of assets, hazardous materials, and the types of materials that we have. But we took it a step further. We also inventoried much more closely the different materials in those rooms, identifying each by room location, but also what is the quantity and amount of those items in the inventory and when they're available, and then, of course, attaching the relevant documents, the safety data sheets themselves for those people that are needing them. And in terms of doing that inventory, we can do it not only at the room or space level, but we can actually go to a shelf or to a cabinet and a bin and actually identify very precisely where we can find these materials, which again is very useful to fill into emergency preparedness, which will come up in a second here. So now we can look at all the materials that we have within our facilities and identify the level of severity of those items and where we can find them and when was the last time we checked the materials. This is great because now when we have emergency preparedness, the nice thing is we can link all of this information back into ARCHIBUS, and what happens is for those first responders, we can better identify where the hazard conditions are, but not only where they are, what situation would a responder be looking at if they were to arrive. At the same time, certainly identifying the location of all the employees and all the access and egress routes that we already do within the application. We have also taken steps to make it easier to send out notifications via bulk email so that you can do site-specific or department-specific requirements. It seems like last year, I know in Boston at least, there would have been nice to have what were the notifications that we would needed to issue with respect to all the snow days that we ended up incurring as one form of emergency, but naturally any sort of fire or electrical damage or other storm-related damage that you could certainly experience at a given point in time. So it's important for us to help facilitate the information that's contained within ARCHIBUS, not only from a hazardous materials point of view, but a hazardous waste or whether it's an assessment of asbestos or something like that, so that first responders know what to deal with. Moving on to energy management, we continue to help facilitate the use of energy information to better understand what's going on. And the goal here is to do a better comparison of how we did this year versus the previous year so that we can understand the impact of energy conservation programs, and at the same time make it easy for folks to determine the effective cost per square foot of the different types of buildings. So whether you're dealing with a warehouse, office building, research building, data center, you can see where the costs are being applied at different buildings. And also aligned with that, if you're really tracking your energy bills and the meters that you have, you can get alerts from within ARCHIBUS to identify where there's a situation, where there's a discrepancy from what you've measured versus what you were billed. And in looking at that data, you can read through some of the specific details and determine what the values were and why there's discrepancy in the billing, and then associate that back to a very specific meter so that you can work with the utility to make any corrections. So, it's been a pretty extensive presentation. we're at the top of the hour, and what are the next steps? Very easy. For those that are interested in some of these new capabilities, please revert to your current installation and see where you're at, and then, of course, contact Robotech to make an arrangement for a specific presentation and discuss any plans that you might have to upgrade to the newer versions of the software.